Two names echo louder than any other in ancient Greek history: Sparta and Athens. One was a military machine, the other a cradle of democracy and art. They were rivals, enemies, and the most dominant forces of their time. But centuries later, we still ask the question: who really won? Not just the war, but the legacy, the future. In this episode of Tick World Chronicles, we dive deep into one of history's greatest rivalries to find out who truly triumphed in the battle for the soul of Greece. By the 5th century BCE, the Greek world was not a unified empire, but a quilt of fiercely independent city-states, known as polis, scattered across the rocky coasts, fertile plains, and island chains of the Aegean Sea. There was no Greece as we know it. Instead, there were hundreds of these autonomous city-states, each with its own government, laws, currency, calendar, and military. Some were monarchies, others oligarchies, and a few daring ones, like Athens, experimented with early forms of democracy. These cities were bound together by a common language, shared gods, and legendary tales from Homer's epics. But politically, they were rivals. And among them, two rose to dominance: Sparta and Athens. They stood at the top of the Hellenic world. Yet they couldn't have been more different, not just in geography or culture, but in their very view of life itself. Athens, perched in the region of Attica, was a city of seafarers and visionaries. In 508 BCE, a reformer named Cleisthenes introduced a bold experiment, a new form of governance: democratia, rule by the people. Citizens could vote, debate, hold office, and propose laws. It was far from perfect. Women, slaves, and foreigners were excluded, but it was revolutionary. Athens grew rich from trade, powered by its vast navy and bustling port of Piraeus. It became a cultural superpower, birthing the great tragedies of Sophocles and Euripides, the logic of Socrates, the architecture of the Parthenon, and the ideals that would shape Western civilization. Far to the south, nestled in the fertile valley of Laconia, stood Sparta. A landlocked and isolationist society, Sparta rejected trade, luxury, and excess. Instead, it built its power on military domination. From the age of 7, boys were torn from their families and enrolled in the agoge, a brutal state-run training program that forged them into warriors through hardship, fear, and pain. Sparta was an oligarchy, ruled by a dual kingship and a rigid council. Its population was divided into castes. Only full-blooded Spartan males, called Spartiates, could vote or fight. The rest, helots or state-owned serfs, lived under oppression, ensuring the army was always fed, always armed. Spartans lived simple lives of discipline, obedience, and sacrifice. They didn't build temples, they built soldiers. They didn't write plays, they drilled in silence. They weren't interested in art, only in war. Athens and Sparta weren't just rivals. They were the embodiment of two diametrically opposed worldviews. Athens believed in logos, reason, debate, and the power of words. Sparta believed in kratos, strength, silence, and the power of arms. Athenians saw Spartans as rigid, uncultured brutes, slaves to tradition and brutality. Spartans saw Athenians as decadent, effeminate, soft, corrupted by wealth, too clever for their own good. These two cities weren't destined to merely coexist. The clash was inevitable. From 431 to 404 BCE, the Greek world descended into darkness, a brutal 27-year conflict that tore the very heart out of Hellenic civilization. It was not just a war between armies, but between ideals: democracy versus oligarchy, naval power versus infantry might, art versus austerity. This was the Peloponnesian War. On one side stood Athens, leading the Delian League, a maritime empire whose coffers overflowed with silver, whose ships ruled the Aegean, and whose people believed in reasoned debate. On the other stood Sparta, commander of the Peloponnesian League, a land army unlike any the world had seen, backed by discipline, fear, and the silence of hardened warriors. As the war began, Athens seemed unstoppable. But in just the second year, disaster struck, not by Spartan spear, but by unseen enemy, plague. Cramped behind the long walls during a siege, disease spread like wildfire. In less than 2 years, a quarter of Athens' population perished, including the great statesman Pericles, father of Athenian democracy. The city survived, but the soul of Athens would never fully recover. And yet, Athens fought on. In a rare moment of triumph, they captured over 100 Spartan hoplites on the island of Sphacteria, something once thought impossible. The myth of Spartan invincibility cracked, but pride blinded the Athenians. In 415 BCE, they launched an ambitious expedition to conquer Sicily, far from home. What followed was a catastrophe. Trapped in hostile waters, the Athenian navy was annihilated, tens of thousands of soldiers either killed or enslaved in the stone quarries of Syracuse. Athens lost not just men, but its momentum. In desperation, Sparta did the unthinkable. It allied with Persia, the ancient enemy they had once bled to resist. Persian gold built a Spartan fleet, and in 405 BCE, that fleet struck the final blow at Aegospotami, annihilating Athens' last naval hope. The following year, Athens surrendered. Its walls were torn down, its empire dissolved, its democracy extinguished. Sparta had won. The mighty Athenian empire lay in ruin. But if victory is measured in peace, prosperity, or longevity, then Sparta's triumph was a mirage. The Spartans imposed harsh rule over the Greek world. They installed puppet oligarchies, like the brutal 30 tyrants in Athens, and governed with an iron fist. But Sparta had no experience managing an empire. Its rigid society, built for war not diplomacy, alienated friend and foe alike. Thebes, Corinth, and even some former Spartan allies revolted. The final blow came in 371 BCE. At the Battle of Leuctra, a rising power, Thebes shattered Sparta's legendary hoplite phalanx using brilliant tactics under Epaminondas. Sparta never recovered. Its myth of military supremacy died on that battlefield. By the time Alexander the Great emerged, both Sparta and Athens were shadows of their former selves, weakened, divided, and no longer the masters of Greece. If history were written only in blood, Sparta would be the victor. But history is written with ideas. And in that realm, Athens never stopped fighting. Athens' brief experiment with democracy would echo far beyond its fall. The Roman Republic borrowed its assemblies. The United States Constitution carried echoes of Athenian citizen participation. Modern democracies owe their very existence to the radical vision born in the Athenian agora. Socrates taught Plato. Plato taught Aristotle. Aristotle tutored Alexander the Great. And through them, the world learned to ask questions, seek evidence, build reason. Athens gave us philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, biology, and logic, the very tools of modern thought. Athens also gave us the drama of the human condition. Tragedy, comedy, lyric poetry, and theater, all birthed in the shadow of the Parthenon. The Olympic spirit, the pursuit of beauty, the balance of reason and emotion, all traced back to Athens. In the end, Sparta won the war. It crushed Athens, leveled its walls, and silenced its democracy for a time. But Sparta could not hold what it had taken. It ruled without vision, without adaptability. It won battles, but not hearts. And like a sword left in the rain, its strength rusted. Athens lost the war, but won the future. Though its empire faded, its ideas survived. The Athenian vision of reason, dialogue, civic duty, and the value of the individual would echo through time, not as a political power, but as a philosophical one. So who really won? Sparta won the conflict, but Athens won the conversation. Because the true measure of a civilization isn't just in what it conquers, but in what it creates, and what it leaves behind. Today, we live in a world shaped more by Athenian thought than Spartan steel. And though Sparta may have silenced Athens for a generation, it could never silence its voice. If you found this history powerful, subscribe for more cinematic deep dives into the ancient world. And remember, sometimes the greatest victories are not won by force, but by thought.